Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather to reflect on a profound truth that lies at the heart of our personal healing. Healing starts when you forgive yourself. We all carry burdens, moments where we faltered, made mistakes, or failed to meet our own expectations. These experiences, though painful, are part of being human, and yet far too often we are our own harshest critics. We dwell on the past, we carry the weight of guilt and shame, and in doing so we keep ourselves bound to those moments, unable to move forward. But true healing cannot begin until we forgive ourselves. It is only in the act of self-forgiveness that we find the freedom to grow and become whole. The power of self-acceptance. The first step towards healing is self-acceptance. Many of us spend years trying to hide or deny parts of ourselves that we deem imperfect. Our mistakes, our vulnerabilities, our fears. We put on a mask to the world, pretending to be something we're not, because we fear judgment or rejection. But the truth is, healing begins when we stop hiding from ourselves. It begins when we acknowledge the entirety of who we are, embracing not only our strengths, but also our weaknesses. To forgive yourself is to accept that you are flawed, as we all are. To forgive yourself is to realize that imperfection is not a flaw in need of correction, but a part of the rich, complicated, and beautifully human tapestry that makes up who you are. It is in embracing your mistakes, your fears, your scars, that you come to understand your wholeness. You are not just your successes, but also your failures. And when you can accept both, you free yourself to begin the journey of healing. The liberation of letting go of self-blame. The second key to healing through self-forgiveness is the liberation from self-blame. For too long, many of us live with an internalized voice that says we are not good enough, that our past actions define us, or that we do not deserve happiness. This voice whispers to us in moments of doubt, reinforcing the narrative that our mistakes are insurmountable obstacles in our lives. But this is not the truth. Holding on to guilt or self-blame is like carrying an anchor, dragging it behind us wherever we go. It weighs us down, preventing us from moving forward. But the moment we release that burden, when we choose to forgive ourselves, we begin to lift that anchor. We make space for healing. We make space for growth, renewal, and transformation. To forgive yourself is not to excuse past actions. It is to acknowledge them, learn from them, and choose to let them go. By releasing the guilt that holds you back, you create the possibility for a future that is not dictated by past mistakes. You free yourself to grow, to evolve, and to become the person you were always meant to be. The journey toward wholeness. Finally, the act of self-forgiveness is a journey toward wholeness. It is not about erasing your past or forgetting your mistakes. It is about integrating them into your life in a meaningful and constructive way. To heal is to acknowledge the full range of human experience, the light and the shadow, the joy and the pain, and to recognize that they all contribute to the person you are becoming. When you forgive yourself, you are not excusing or diminishing your humanity. You are honoring it. You are embracing the contradictions, the complexities, and the rich depth of your soul. This is the path toward wholeness, to reconcile the parts of yourself that you have ignored, rejected, or feared. It is only in this reconciliation that you find true peace, both within yourself and in your relationships with others. Healing does not come from denying who we have been, but from embracing who we are becoming. When you forgive yourself, you allow the energy of renewal to flow through you. You open yourself up to the fullness of life, to the richness of every experience, knowing that all of it, every part of you, is worthy of love, acceptance, and compassion. Healing is a complex and deeply personal process, one that begins with the acceptance of oneself. When we talk about healing, we often think of physical recovery, emotional restoration, or psychological repair. But what underpins all these forms of healing is the ability to accept ourselves as we are, flaws, imperfections, mistakes, and all. The truth is that healing does not start with fixing what's broken. It begins with the acknowledgement that despite our flaws, we are worthy of love, compassion, and care. This acceptance of ourselves is where true healing begins. Too often, we are trapped in the illusion that in order to heal, we must first fix everything about ourselves that feels inadequate or wrong. We may have been conditioned by society, family, or our own inner dialogue to believe that we must strive for perfection in order to be accepted or loved. This conditioning can be incredibly damaging, for it teaches us to view ourselves as projects in need of constant improvement rather than as complete, worthy beings who deserve acceptance exactly as we are. Self-acceptance is not about resigning ourselves to our perceived flaws or simply giving up on growth or improvement. It is instead about shifting our perspective. It's about understanding that we are not defined by our mistakes, our fears, or our imperfections. We are multifaceted beings, and healing begins when we can step back and see ourselves in our entirety. Not just in the parts we like, but in the parts we resist, fear, or try to hide. At the core of self-acceptance is the recognition that we are human. We all make mistakes. We all have weaknesses. We all carry scars from past experiences. And it is in acknowledging and embracing these aspects of ourselves that we begin to heal. For it is only when we stop fighting against ourselves, when we stop trying to perfect or hide our flaws, that we can truly start the process of healing. The journey to self-acceptance often starts with confronting the parts of ourselves that we wish to ignore. We all have a shadow, the parts of our psyche that we reject or disown because they do not fit into the image of the person we wish to present to the world. These can include our fears, our insecurities, our rage, our jealousy, and our vulnerabilities. But the truth is that these parts are not separate from us. They are as much a part of us as our strengths and our virtues. When we fail to accept these parts of ourselves, we create internal conflict. We create a dissonance between the person we present to the world and the person we actually are. This dissonance manifests as stress, anxiety, guilt, shame, and inner turmoil. It is only by embracing our shadow, by recognizing and accepting the parts of ourselves that we wish to deny, that we begin to move toward healing. The act of acceptance does not mean we condone or approve of our actions, but it means we accept that these actions, these feelings, and these parts of ourselves exist and are worthy of our compassion. Self-acceptance also involves understanding that we are not defined by the mistakes we have made. It is so easy to get caught up in the belief that our past actions dictate our future. If we have made a mistake, if we have hurt others, or if we have failed in some way, it is tempting to label ourselves as bad or unworthy. This can be especially true if we are not offered forgiveness by others or if we have trouble forgiving ourselves. The weight of this belief can be suffocating, creating a cycle where we live in constant self-judgment and regret. But the truth is that we are not our mistakes. Our mistakes are merely experiences, opportunities for learning, and catalysts for growth. When we embrace self-acceptance, we release ourselves from the burden of constantly judging and condemning ourselves. We stop letting our past actions define us, and we open the door to growth, transformation, and change. Self-acceptance involves acknowledging that we are always evolving. No one remains static. The person you were yesterday is not the person you are today, and the person you are today is not the person you will be tomorrow. In this way, self-acceptance is also about recognizing the impermanence of our emotions and experiences. Just because we feel ashamed, fearful, or guilty today doesn't mean that those feelings will define our entire lives. Healing begins when we stop identifying ourselves with our current emotional state. Instead of letting our emotions define us, emotions, like everything else, are temporary. They do not define our essence. When we accept ourselves, we recognize that we are not bound to any one emotion or experience. We are capable of change, and healing begins when we embrace that potential. A critical aspect of self-acceptance is also the practice of self-compassion. Healing cannot happen in an environment of self-criticism. It is often the harshest voices we hear that come from within us. The internal narrative of "I'm not good enough," "I'm a failure," or "I don't deserve love" keeps us stuck in a state of suffering. But when we begin to accept ourselves, we can start to replace those critical thoughts with messages of kindness and compassion. Self-compassion is not about excusing our wrongs or avoiding accountability, but about offering ourselves the same care, understanding, and forgiveness that we would offer a friend or loved one. Self-acceptance allows us to stop seeing ourselves as flawed or incomplete. It enables us to see ourselves as whole and worthy of healing. By embracing our imperfections, we open up the possibility for growth and change. We stop trying to fix ourselves and instead focus on nurturing our inner selves. Healing comes when we acknowledge that we are already enough, exactly as we are, and that any flaws we perceive are simply opportunities for self-awareness and growth. But the path to self-acceptance is not always easy. It requires vulnerability, courage, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves. It requires us to stop running from our pain and instead to face it head on. For many of us, the fear of acceptance stems from the belief that accepting ourselves means condoning our mistakes or behaviors. But this is not the case. To accept yourself means to embrace all aspects of your being without judgment or rejection. It is not about letting yourself off the hook for past mistakes. It is about recognizing that as a human being, you are deserving of compassion and love, regardless of your past. Self-acceptance also means learning to set boundaries and protect our well-being. It means recognizing that we have the right to care for ourselves, to say no when necessary, and to honor our own needs and desires. Too often we neglect our own needs in favor of pleasing others or meeting external expectations. But true healing begins when we understand that we have the right to be whole, just as much as anyone else. By practicing self-acceptance, we give ourselves permission to prioritize our own health, happiness, and emotional well-being. When we begin to accept ourselves, we also start to form healthier, more authentic relationships with others. Often, our inability to accept ourselves leads to codependent relationships, where we look for validation or approval from others in order to feel worthy. But when we accept ourselves, we no longer rely on external sources for validation. Instead, we learn to offer love and compassion to ourselves, which allows us to give love more freely to others. Our relationships become less about seeking approval and more about authentic connection. The road to self-acceptance is a lifelong journey, but it is the foundation upon which healing rests. By accepting ourselves as we are, imperfections and all, we allow ourselves the space to grow, to learn, and to heal. Self-acceptance is the key that unlocks the door to true healing, for it is only when we accept ourselves that we can begin the work of forgiveness, growth, and transformation. Healing for many of us seems like an elusive goal, a distant destination we long to reach. But the truth is, healing doesn't begin with others. It begins within ourselves. Often the most powerful obstacle to our own healing is the way we relate to the past, especially the weight of guilt and self-blame. These emotions can be so pervasive, so deeply ingrained in our sense of self, that they can feel insurmountable. We may look back at our actions, our decisions, or our mistakes and believe that we are forever bound to them. This sense of self-blame is an internal prison, one that prevents us from moving forward. But the most liberating act of all is realizing that healing begins when we let go of this burden. Letting go of self-blame is not about absolving ourselves of responsibility, nor is it about ignoring the consequences of our actions. It is about releasing ourselves from the chains of guilt that hold us captive, allowing us to embrace the present moment with clarity and purpose. Self-blame often stems from the belief that we could have acted differently, that we should have known better, or that we are somehow inherently bad because of our past choices. We spend countless hours replaying our mistakes, wishing we had made a different decision, or holding ourselves to impossibly high standards. We feel responsible for outcomes that were beyond our control, or we take on the emotional weight of others' pain as if it were our own. In doing so, we create a narrative in which we are the central figure, the one to blame for everything that went wrong, regardless of the full context or the complexities involved. This internal narrative is one of the most damaging aspects of self-blame. It reduces us to a single isolated point in time, a moment of failure or a mistake that we cannot escape. But the first step toward healing is understanding that self-blame is a distortion of reality. While it is natural to feel regret or remorse when we make mistakes, self-blame often goes beyond this. It shifts the blame onto us in a way that feels permanent and unchangeable. The truth is, no matter how much we blame ourselves, it cannot alter the past or change the decisions we made. The past is fixed, but our future is still open, still full of possibility. Holding ourselves hostage to past mistakes only serves to prevent us from moving forward. The act of letting go of self-blame is not about minimizing the hurt we may have caused or forgetting the lessons that come from our actions. It is about acknowledging that we are human and that we will always make mistakes. No one is perfect, and in order to heal, we must let go of the idea that we are defined by our mistakes. When we choose to forgive ourselves, we open up the possibility for growth. This act of self-forgiveness creates the space to learn from our experiences without being weighed down by guilt. We are able to accept that yes, we made mistakes, but those mistakes do not have to define us. They can be seen as opportunities for growth, for deepening our understanding and for cultivating compassion, not only for others, but also for ourselves. Self-forgiveness allows us to transform the narrative from one of guilt and self-punishment to one of growth and self-compassion. We stop seeing ourselves as failures and start seeing ourselves as works in progress, human beings who are constantly learning and evolving. At the heart of self-forgiveness lies the understanding that we are deserving of love and compassion regardless of our actions. Self-blame often stems from a belief that we are unworthy of love because of our mistakes. This belief is a dangerous one because it creates a cycle in which we punish ourselves, believing that we must atone for our actions before we can be worthy of peace, forgiveness, or happiness. The paradox, however, is that it is only through forgiving ourselves that we are able to release the hold that guilt has over us. By forgiving ourselves, we grant ourselves permission to be human, to have flaws, and to make mistakes without the need for perpetual self-punishment. This process is not an act of self-indulgence, but an act of self-compassion. It is an acknowledgement that, just like anyone else, we deserve to heal, to grow, and to experience the fullness of life without constantly looking over our shoulder at past mistakes. One of the most transformative aspects of letting go of self-blame is the freedom it provides. When we let go of the weight of guilt, we open up space within ourselves. Space for joy, for peace, for creativity, and for love. Carrying the burden of self-blame weighs us down emotionally and physically. It impacts our relationships, our productivity, and our mental and physical health. It affects the way we show up in the world because we are constantly carrying the energy of guilt with us. It can manifest as anxiety, depression, or feelings of worthlessness. The emotional toll of self-blame is immense, and it prevents us from fully engaging in the present moment. When we forgive ourselves, we are able to release that emotional weight, and we can begin to experience the world and ourselves in a new way, one that is free from the shadows of guilt and regret. Moreover, letting go of self-blame allows us to reclaim our personal power. When we are consumed by guilt, we feel powerless, as though we are helpless in the face of our past mistakes. But by forgiving ourselves, we take back control of our narrative. We stop letting our past define us, and instead we choose to define ourselves based on our actions in the present and our intentions for the future. This reclamation of personal power is empowering, as it reminds us that we are the authors of our own stories. We have the ability to make amends, to learn and to grow, and we have the agency to choose how we respond to our past. Forgiving ourselves is not about denying our mistakes. It is about recognizing that we are not bound by them. And we are not defined by our failures. We are defined by our ability to learn from them and to choose a different path moving forward. Letting go of self-blame also creates space for genuine self-love. Too often we feel that in order to earn self-love, we must be perfect or meet certain standards. But this belief keeps us trapped in a cycle of self-judgment because we can never meet the impossible standards we set for ourselves. Self-forgiveness, however, allows us to love ourselves as we are, flaws, mistakes, and all. We recognize that we are worthy of love, not because of our perfection, but because of our humanity. This shift in perspective is incredibly liberating, as it allows us to embrace ourselves with all our imperfections. It enables us to experience the fullness of our lives without constantly feeling like we must atone for our mistakes. As we let go of self-blame and begin the process of self-forgiveness, we also begin to understand that forgiveness is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing practice. The process of forgiving ourselves is not linear, and it is not always easy. It may take time, and there may be setbacks along the way, but the key is to continue to offer ourselves compassion and to remind ourselves that healing is a journey, not a destination. Each day is an opportunity to practice self-forgiveness, to release the weight of guilt, and to choose a path of healing. Letting go of self-blame does not mean we ignore the consequences of our actions. It does not mean that we fail to take responsibility for our mistakes. It simply means that we no longer allow those mistakes to define us or hold us captive. We take responsibility for what we can, make amends where necessary, and then choose to release the guilt and move forward. By doing so, we not only free ourselves, but also open up the possibility for genuine healing, both for ourselves and for those around us. Healing begins when we stop blaming ourselves for our past and start embracing the present moment with compassion and understanding. By letting go of self-blame, we reclaim our power, embrace our imperfections, and allow ourselves the freedom to grow and transform. This is the essence of healing, releasing ourselves from the past, forgiving ourselves, and stepping into a future filled with possibility. The journey toward healing is ultimately a journey toward wholeness. When we speak of wholeness, we are referring to the integration of all parts of the self, both light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, joy and pain. We are complex beings with many facets, and true healing comes when we accept all parts of ourselves as they are, without judgment or rejection. Wholeness is not about perfection, it is about embracing our entire experience and acknowledging the full spectrum of our humanity. Healing starts when we recognize that every part of us is valuable, that all of our experiences, even the painful ones, contribute to the depth and richness of who we are. The road to wholeness is not always easy. It requires us to face the parts of ourselves that we have long avoided or rejected, the parts that we perceive as broken, weak, or unworthy. Many of us go through life suppressing these parts of ourselves, convinced that they are flaws or deficiencies that need to be fixed. We may suppress our pain, our sadness, or our fear because we believe these emotions are signs of weakness or failure. We may hide our mistakes and imperfections, thinking that they are something to be ashamed of, something that makes us less than whole. But true wholeness can only be achieved when we integrate these parts of ourselves, acknowledging them and accepting them as valid aspects of our experience. This integration is essential for healing, for only when we accept ourselves in our entirety can we move beyond the internal conflict that keeps us stuck in cycles of guilt, shame, and self-judgment. At the heart of the journey toward wholeness is the recognition that we are not defined by our mistakes, our weaknesses, or our fears. These aspects of ourselves are not separate from us, nor are they something we can eliminate or escape. Instead, they are part of the rich, complex tapestry of who we are, and they deserve our attention, understanding, and compassion. Wholeness comes when we stop viewing ourselves as divided or fragmented and start seeing ourselves as integrated and whole, embracing both the light and the dark parts of our being. To do this, we must first recognize that our imperfections are not signs of failure, but rather an inherent part of the human condition. The willingness to embrace our flaws and vulnerabilities is a crucial step in the process of healing, for it is through this embrace that we become whole. This journey toward wholeness involves moving beyond the narrative of perfection and embracing the reality of imperfection. For many of us, the pressure to be perfect, to meet external standards of success, beauty, or achievement can feel overwhelming. We may feel that we are not worthy unless we meet these standards. And this belief can lead to self-criticism, self-doubt, and feelings of inadequacy. But the pursuit of perfection often leads to frustration and disillusionment, because perfection is an illusion. No one can be perfect all the time, and the very idea of perfection creates a false standard by which we judge ourselves and others. When we let go of this ideal of perfection and accept ourselves as we are, flaws and all, we begin to experience a profound sense of freedom. This acceptance is not about resigning ourselves to mediocrity. It is about recognizing that we are worthy of love and acceptance, regardless of our imperfections. Wholeness comes when we stop trying to fit into a mold of perfection and begin to celebrate our uniqueness, our individuality, and our humanity. Healing, then, is not about becoming someone else or turning ourselves into an idealized version of who we think we should be. Healing is about becoming more fully ourselves, more authentically ourselves, and more in tune with the truth of who we are. It is about embracing our full humanity, the light and the dark, the strengths and the weaknesses, and understanding that we are enough as we are. This acceptance of our true selves is the key to healing, for it allows us to step into our power, to reclaim our sense of self, and to move beyond the limiting beliefs that have kept us stuck in patterns of self-doubt and self-judgment. The process of healing toward wholeness also involves a deepening of self-awareness. To become whole, we must first come to understand who we are, our desires, our fears, our motivations, and our beliefs. This requires introspection, self-reflection, and a willingness to confront parts of ourselves that may be uncomfortable or difficult to face. It is often easier to live in denial of our shadow, the parts of ourselves that we find difficult to accept. But true healing comes when we are willing to confront those parts, understand them, and integrate them into our sense of self. This does not mean we have to accept harmful or destructive behaviors, but it does mean that we must understand the root causes of those behaviors so we can make conscious choices to change them. It means recognizing our pain, our fears, and our weaknesses, and embracing them with compassion rather than judgment. Only then can we heal from them and move forward with a deeper sense of self-acceptance. The journey toward wholeness also requires that we let go of the need for external validation. For much of our life, we may have sought approval, recognition, or validation from others in order to feel worthy or complete. We may have looked to others for confirmation that we are good enough, successful enough, or lovable enough. But the truth is that no amount of external validation can provide us with the inner peace and self-assurance that comes from within. Healing requires us to shift our focus from seeking approval from others to cultivating self-cultivation. This means learning to trust our own word and value regardless of what others may think or say. It means learning to listen to our inner voice and following our own path, even when it may not align with societal expectations or the opinions of others. When we stop seeking validation from outside sources and begin to validate ourselves, we become less dependent on external opinions and more grounded in our own sense of self. Wholeness also involves healing our relationships with others. Often, the process of healing requires us to forgive others and to heal old wounds from the past. However, the journey toward wholeness is also about healing our relationship with ourselves. Many of us have internalized the criticism, judgment, or rejection we have experienced from others and turned it inward, using it as a measure of our own worth. This internalization of external judgments creates an internal conflict as we begin to see ourselves through the lens of others' opinions rather than through our own eyes. The process of healing toward wholeness involves letting go of this internalized criticism and learning to see ourselves with compassion and understanding. It means forgiving ourselves for the times we have fallen short, for the mistakes we have made, and for the ways we have hurt ourselves or others. This forgiveness is not about excusing harmful behavior, but about freeing ourselves from the weight of guilt and shame so we can move forward with a sense of peace and acceptance. Ultimately, healing is a process of returning to ourselves. It is about rediscovering the parts of ourselves that we may have lost, forgotten, or suppressed. It is about reclaiming our authenticity, our joy, and our sense of purpose. Healing toward wholeness is not a destination, but a journey that unfolds over time. It is a process of growth, of self-discovery, and of learning to embrace all aspects of ourselves. As we heal, we become more fully who we are meant to be, and in doing so, we become more connected to others, to the world around us, and to the larger process of life itself. Wholeness is not about achieving perfection. It is about embracing the imperfection that is inherent in being human. It is about recognizing that we are all in a process of becoming, and that healing is not an end, but a continual unfolding. The journey toward wholeness requires patience, compassion, and a willingness to embrace all parts of ourselves, even those parts we may find difficult or painful. But it is in this embrace, this acceptance of ourselves in our entirety, that we find the freedom, peace, and wholeness that healing brings. Healing starts when we accept ourselves as we are, when we forgive ourselves for our past, and when we step into our true selves with courage, compassion, and love. In conclusion, healing is not a linear process or a destination to be reached, but rather an ongoing journey that begins with self-acceptance, self-forgiveness, and the integration of all parts of ourselves. It starts when we release the burdens of guilt, shame, and self-blame that often hold us captive, and when we embrace ourselves as whole beings, imperfections, mistakes, strengths, and vulnerabilities all included. Healing begins with the understanding that we are human, and that it is through our imperfections, our struggles, and our flaws that we find our deepest potential for growth and transformation. When we forgive ourselves, we unlock the door to self-compassion and inner peace. We stop defining ourselves by our mistakes and start seeing ourselves as works in progress, capable of change, capable of learning, and deserving of love. In embracing our entirety, we stop living in conflict with ourselves and instead cultivate harmony within. The true essence of healing lies in this self-acceptance, where we no longer need to chase perfection or live up to unrealistic standards. Healing ultimately is about reclaiming our wholeness. It is about shedding the layers of self-doubt, fear, and guilt that have accumulated over the years and allowing ourselves to step into the fullness of who we are. By forgiving ourselves, by accepting our flaws, and by acknowledging the rich, complex tapestry of our lives, we can begin to live with a sense of freedom, peace, and authenticity. The journey of healing does not require us to be perfect, but to be whole, accepting, loving, and compassionate toward ourselves, so that we may in turn offer that same grace to others. Healing starts within, and it is through this inner transformation that we can create a life of purpose, peace, and wholeness.